What happens when a power-tripping cop picks the wrong black woman to dominate on a quiet roadside? Only to realize too late she was trained to survive far worse than him. Watch closely because this is not just a traffic stop, it is the moment arrogance collides with discipline forged in war. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The late afternoon sun stretched low across the Texas highway, casting long amber streaks over the endless ribbon of asphalt. Captain Diana Thorne guided her dark blue sedan along the open road with steady hands, her posture relaxed but precise, the kind of control that did not come from comfort but from years of conditioning. The hum of the engine blended with the faint whisper of wind slipping past the windows, creating a quiet rhythm that allowed her mind to settle. She had just left a military recognition ceremony 2 counties over, an event filled with polished speeches and firm handshakes, where medals caught the light, but stories remained unspoken. Now, dressed in a simple navy blouse and slacks, her hair pulled neatly back, she looked like any other woman heading home after a long day. No insignia, no uniform, no visible trace of the authority she carried. To anyone passing by, she was ordinary. That was how she preferred it. Diana's eyes moved across her mirrors with practiced awareness, never lingering, always scanning. It was not tension, it was habit. Years of operating in unpredictable environments had carved that awareness into her instincts. Even here, miles away from any battlefield, her senses never fully stood down. A faded gas station appeared ahead on the right, its weathered sign creaking gently in the breeze. A few pickup trucks were scattered across the lot, and a man in a grease-stained cap leaned against a pump, watching the road with idle curiosity. Diana eased her foot slightly off the accelerator, considering whether to stop, then decided against it. Home was less than 30 minutes away. The road stretched open and empty in front of her, promising a quiet end to the day. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to breathe deeper, to let the weight of responsibility slip just a fraction from her shoulders. But peace, she had learned, was often temporary. In her rearview mirror, a pair of headlights appeared, distant at first, then closing the gap with deliberate speed. Diana's gaze sharpened, not with alarm, but with recognition. The vehicle behind her maintained a steady approach, its presence lingering just long enough to feel intentional. She adjusted her grip on the steering wheel, her expression unchanged, her breathing even. Whatever was coming, she would meet it the same way she met everything else, calm, measured, and fully prepared. The headlights behind her flared brighter, then suddenly split into flashing red and blue, painting the road in sharp pulses of authority. Diana did not react with surprise. Her eyes simply narrowed a fraction as she exhaled slowly and guided her car toward the gravel shoulder. The tires crunched softly as she came to a smooth, controlled stop beside the quiet stretch of highway, the distant gas station now just behind her in the side mirror. Dust lifted in a lazy cloud around the vehicle before settling again into stillness. For a brief moment, there was only the low hum of her engine and the rhythmic ticking of cooling metal. Diana placed both hands deliberately on the steering wheel, fingers relaxed, visible, exactly where they should be. Her posture remained upright, composed, every movement intentional. In the rearview mirror, the patrol car door swung open with force. Officer Derek Holloway stepped out, his boots striking the ground with heavy, impatient steps. He adjusted his belt with a sharp tug, his jaw set tight, eyes already locked onto Diana's vehicle, as if he had made up his mind long before approaching. There was no hesitation in his stride, no curiosity, only a rigid sense of control that bordered on hostility. He circled slightly as he approached, angling himself so he could peer through the side window before she even had a chance to speak. His shadow stretched across her door, blocking the last of the sunlight. Diana kept her gaze forward, not avoiding him, not challenging him, simply waiting. The sound of his knuckles rapping against the glass came hard and abrupt, louder than necessary. "License and registration," he barked, his voice sharp, already edged with irritation. Diana turned her head slowly, meeting his gaze through the window. There was no fear in her expression, only a quiet steadiness that seemed to irritate him further. She reached for the button and lowered the window partway, the warm air rushing in between them. "Good afternoon, officer," she said evenly, her tone controlled and respectful. "May I ask the reason for the stop?" Holloway's lips pressed into a thin line, the question clearly unwelcome. His eyes flicked over her, scanning, judging, searching for something to justify the suspicion already written across his face. "I asked for your license and registration." He snapped again, slower this time, each word carrying a deliberate weight. Diana nodded once, unbothered by his tone, and reached carefully toward her purse. Every movement was measured, visible, non-threatening. "I'm going to reach into my bag now," she stated calmly. Holloway leaned in slightly, his posture tightening, one hand hovering near his belt as if expecting resistance that had not been given. "You better keep those hands where I can see them," he warned, his voice dropping into something colder, more pointed. Diana paused just long enough to let the tension settle, then continued exactly as she had said she would, retrieving her wallet and handing over her identification without a single abrupt motion. Holloway snatched it from her fingers with unnecessary force, glancing at it briefly before shifting his attention back to her face. His eyes narrowed, suspicion deepening rather than easing. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered abruptly. The command hung in the air, heavy and unearned. Diana's grip on the steering wheel tightened just slightly, not in fear, but in recognition. The situation had already moved beyond routine. Still, her voice remained steady. "Officer, I have complied with your request. I would like to understand why I am being asked to step out." Holloway's expression hardened, irritation flashing openly now. "Because I said so," he shot back, his tone rising, authority spilling into aggression. He took a step back from the door, his stance widening as if preparing for escalation rather than avoiding it. "Now step out of the car. Do not make this harder than it needs to be." The quiet highway seemed to hold its breath as the tension coiled tighter, the line between procedure and abuse already beginning to blur. The quiet tension snapped into something sharper as Holloway's final words hung in the air, his stance rigid, his patience already gone. Diana let a single breath pass through her nose, slow and controlled, before she moved. "Understood," she said, her voice even, unshaken. Her hand reached for the door handle with deliberate care, every motion precise, predictable, exactly what protocol demanded. The door opened with a soft creak, and she stepped out onto the gravel shoulder, the late sun catching along the edges of her silhouette. She stood upright immediately, hands visible at her sides, posture balanced, not defensive, not submissive, simply present. Holloway watched her closely, his eyes narrowing as if searching for something that justified the tension already building in his chest. There was something about her stillness that unsettled him, something about the way she did not rush, did not hesitate, did not fill the silence with nervous explanations. Most people talked. Most people tried to explain themselves before he even asked. Diana didn't either. "Turn around," he ordered abruptly, his voice cutting through the quiet highway air. "Place your hands on the vehicle." Diana's gaze flicked briefly toward him, not defiant but assessing. "Officer," she replied calmly, "I have complied with every request. Am I being detained?" The question landed wrong. Holloway's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping along his cheek as irritation flared into something more personal. "You are being investigated," he snapped, stepping closer, closing the distance between them in 2 heavy strides. "Now do what I said." Diana did not argue further. Slowly, she turned, placing her palms flat against the warm metal of her car. The surface radiated heat from the sun, grounding, steady. Her breathing remained even, her shoulders relaxed, though her awareness sharpened to a fine edge. Behind her, Holloway moved in, his presence heavy, invasive. She could hear the faint creak of his equipment, the controlled but agitated rhythm of his breathing. "Spread your feet," he added, his tone no longer just authoritative, but edged with something more aggressive, something intent on control rather than procedure. Diana adjusted her stance slightly, complying without hesitation. Still, the calm around her did not break. It held, firm and unyielding, like a structure built to withstand pressure rather than avoid it. Holloway circled behind her, his movements quick, almost impatient now. He grabbed her wrist suddenly, not with the measured grip of routine, but with a sharp, forceful motion that twisted her arm just enough to assert dominance. Diana's muscles reacted instantly, not in resistance, but in awareness, absorbing the pressure, adjusting without panic. "You think you are real composed, huh?" Holloway muttered near her ear, his voice low, carrying a strained edge. "I have seen your type before. Acting calm does not make you innocent." Diana did not respond. Her eyes remained forward, focused on a distant stretch of road where heat shimmered in soft waves. Every instinct in her body registered the escalation, cataloging it, measuring it, but she gave him nothing to feed on. That silence only sharpened his frustration. He tightened his grip slightly, testing, pushing, waiting for a reaction that did not come. The absence of fear, the absence of pleading, it unsettled him in ways he could not name. A pickup truck slowed as it passed, the driver glancing over, curiosity flickering before he continued on. The world was still moving, still watching, even if from a distance. Holloway noticed it too, his posture stiffening, his authority now something he felt the need to perform. "You people always think you can question everything," he said, louder now, as if speaking not just to her, but to anyone who might be listening. "Out here, you follow my instructions. No exceptions." Diana's fingers pressed lightly against the car, grounding herself, her voice finally breaking the silence, calm and precise. "I'm following your instructions." The statement was simple, factual, undeniable. And somehow, that made it worse. Holloway's control was no longer being reinforced by fear or resistance. It was being met with something steadier, something that refused to bend in the way he expected. The air between them tightened, the line already crossed, the situation no longer about a stop, but about power being tested against something that refused to yield. The tension did not break, it snapped. Holloway's grip tightened without warning, his fingers digging into Diana's wrist as he yanked her arm higher up her back, forcing her shoulder forward against the car. The movement was abrupt, unnecessary, designed to provoke rather than control. "You think you are smarter than me?" he barked, his voice rising now, sharp enough to carry across the open stretch of road. Diana's body absorbed the force with trained precision, her stance adjusting just enough to maintain balance without resisting. Her cheek hovered inches from the sun-warmed metal, her breathing still steady, controlled, untouched by the surge of aggression behind her. "I am not resisting," she stated clearly, each word measured, her tone unchanged despite the pressure twisting through her arm. That calm response only fueled him. Holloway shoved her harder into the vehicle, the sound of fabric brushing against metal cutting through the quiet air. "Stop talking," he snapped, his face tightening, irritation bleeding fully into anger. "I know exactly what you are doing." He shifted his stance, pressing his weight closer, using his body to pin her more firmly in place. One hand forced her wrist higher while the other hovered near his cuffs, as if he was already preparing for an escalation he had created himself. Diana's fingers spread slightly against the car, grounding herself. Her eyes remained forward, focused, distant, as if she were somewhere else entirely, somewhere this moment had already been accounted for. A second vehicle slowed as it passed, tires crunching faintly against the edge of the road. This time, it did not move on immediately. It lingered just enough for a phone to appear in the driver's hand, angled toward the scene. Holloway noticed, and for a fraction of a second, something flickered across his expression, not doubt, but awareness. Then it hardened again, doubling down. "You people always think you can play the system," he said louder, projecting now, his voice carrying with forced authority. "Acting calm, acting polite, like that is going to save you. Diana's voice came again, low, even unwavering. "Officer, you are escalating this situation without cause." The words were not emotional. They were factual, precise, and that precision struck deeper than any argument. Holloway's jaw clenched, his teeth pressing together as his control slipped further into something raw and reactive. "Do not tell me how to do my job," he shot back, his voice tightening as he suddenly released one arm only to grab both of her wrists and pull them behind her back in a single, forceful motion. The shift was aggressive, the kind meant to dominate quickly, decisively. Diana allowed the movement, her body turning slightly as he repositioned her, but there was no panic in her posture, no sudden jerks, no struggle. Just controlled compliance. That lack of resistance made the moment feel heavier, not lighter. It exposed the imbalance for what it was. Holloway fumbled briefly with his cuffs, the metallic rattle sharp in the open air as he forced one wrist inward. "You are being detained," he declared, though the words came out more like justification than procedure. Diana's gaze lifted slightly, not toward him, but toward the horizon, where the road stretched endlessly forward. Her voice, when it came, was quieter now, but carried a weight that did not match her position. "On what grounds?" The question lingered, unanswered, as the heat, the silence, and the watching eyes pressed in around them, turning a routine stop into something far more dangerous, something already spiraling beyond Holloway's control, even if he had not realized it yet. The question lingered in the air, unanswered, but it did not go unnoticed. Holloway's grip stiffened, as if the very act of being questioned had struck something deeper than procedure. "You do not get to ask questions," he snapped, his voice sharp, uneven now, betraying a rising frustration he could no longer fully contain. With a forceful motion, he jerked Diana's arms higher, pushing her off balance just enough to assert control. "You follow orders. That is how this works." Diana absorbed the movement, her feet shifting slightly against the gravel to stabilize, her posture still remarkably composed despite the strain on her shoulders. There was no cry, no protest, only a controlled inhale, then a steady exhale, as if she were regulating not just her body, but the entire moment. "I am complying," she said again, her tone unwavering, though the pressure on her wrists had increased. That composure, that refusal to fracture under pressure, began to feel like defiance to Holloway. His breathing grew heavier, more audible now, his movements sharper, less measured. "Does not look like it to me," he muttered, more to himself than to her, as he shifted his stance and drove her forward, pressing her torso down against the hood of the car. The impact was controlled but firm, enough to emphasize dominance without crossing into chaos. Yet the intent behind it was unmistakable. Diana's palm slid slightly against the metal, catching her balance instantly, her muscles responding with trained precision. Her eyes remained open, focused on the stretch of road ahead, unblinking, unshaken. Behind them, the faint sound of a car, door closing echoed. The same vehicle that had slowed earlier was now fully stopped along the shoulder. A young woman, Emily Carter, stood near her car, phone raised, recording. She did not speak, but her presence was undeniable. Holloway glanced over his shoulder briefly, catching sight of her, and for a split second, something flickered in his expression, not restraint, but calculation. Then his posture hardened again, louder now, more performative. "Stop resisting," he barked, though Diana had not moved against him once. The words rang out, not as a command, but as a narrative he was trying to build. Diana's voice followed, calm, clear, carrying just enough to be heard beyond them. "I am not resisting." The contrast between his force and her stillness sharpened the scene, drawing a silent line that anyone watching could see. Holloway's jaw tightened further, his frustration now feeding on itself. He reached for his cuffs again, the metal clinking loudly as he secured one around her wrist with a quick, practiced snap. The sound cut through the open air, final, deliberate. He moved to secure the other, but his grip faltered for just a fraction of a second, not from hesitation, but from the growing awareness that something about this was not unfolding the way he expected. Diana's voice came again, softer this time, but carrying a weight that did not match her restrained position. "You are making a mistake." There was no threat in her tone, no raised volume, just certainty. Holloway let out a sharp breath through his nose, dismissing it immediately, forcing the second cuff into place with a decisive click. "Save it," he said, his voice low, dismissive, but edged with something unsettled beneath the surface. He stepped back slightly, still holding her arms, still maintaining control, but the air around them had shifted. The presence of the camera, the stillness of the witness, the unshakable calm of the woman he had pinned, it all pressed in at once. And yet, he doubled down, tightening his hold once more, as if control alone could override the quiet sense that something here was about to turn in a way he could not stop. Holloway's grip remained firm as he adjusted his stance, pulling Diana upright just enough to reposition her against the side of the patrol car. The cuffs stayed tight around her wrists, his hand still wrapped around her arm, as if letting go would mean losing control entirely. The moment stretched, heavy and deliberate, the kind of silence that carried more weight than shouting ever could. He reached for his radio with his free hand, pressing the button with a sharp, practiced motion. "Dispatch, I have one detained," he said, his voice steadier now, as if speaking into the system helped him reassert authority. "Possible obstruction, non-compliant behavior." The words came out clean, official, but they did not match the reality unfolding just feet away. Diana stood still beside him, her posture straight despite the restraint, her breathing slow, measured, untouched by the labels being placed on her. Her eyes drifted briefly toward the horizon again, then back to the side mirror of the cruiser, where she could see both Holloway and the woman recording behind them. She said nothing at first, allowing him to finish, allowing him to commit. Holloway released the radio and exhaled through his nose, a faint sense of satisfaction settling in as if the situation was now locked in place. "You should have just listened," he muttered, more controlled now, but still edged with irritation. "Would have been a simple warning. Now you made it something else." Diana turned her head slightly, just enough that her voice would carry clearly without raising it. "Officer Holloway." Hearing his name made him pause, just for a fraction of a second. His eyes flicked toward her, narrowing. She continued, her tone calm, almost conversational, but there was something beneath it now, something precise. "I'm going to give you one opportunity to correct this." The words were not loud, not dramatic, but they landed with a quiet weight that did not belong in her current position. Holloway let out a dry, disbelieving chuckle, shaking his head as if amused by the audacity. "You are in cuffs on the side of the road," he said, his voice dripping with disbelief. "You do not give me opportunities." Diana did not react to the tone. "You are detaining a federally trained officer without cause," she said evenly, each word placed with deliberate clarity. "And you're doing it on camera." Holloway's smile widened, but it was thin, stretched, more defensive than confident. He glanced briefly toward Emily again, then back at Diana, dismissing the implication with a scoff. "Everyone claims something," he replied, waving a hand slightly as if brushing the statement aside. "Lawyer, officer, military, I have heard it all." He stepped closer again, reasserting his grip on her arm, his voice lowering into something more personal, more contemptuous. "You think saying big words is going to scare me? Out here, it is my call." Diana's gaze met his directly now, steady, unflinching. "This is your last chance to step back before this escalates beyond your control." The warning was clear, unmistakable, and yet delivered without anger, without urgency, as if she already knew the outcome. Holloway stared at her for a moment, then let out a sharp laugh, the sound cutting through the tension with forced confidence. "Escalates?" he repeated, almost mocking. "You're already there." He tightened his grip once more, turning slightly toward the patrol car, as if preparing to move her, to finalize the arrest, to close the situation on his terms. In that moment, he made his choice, not by force, not by mistake, but by refusing to listen, by dismissing the only warning he was ever going to get. And the silence that followed felt less like control and more like the final second before something irreversible began. Holloway's hand tightened on Diana's arm as he turned toward the patrol car, ready to force the moment to its conclusion, ready to lock in a decision he believed was already his to make. But before he could take a single step, Diana spoke again, her voice no longer just calm, but carrying a quiet authority that cut through everything around them. "That will be far enough, officer." The tone was different now. Not a request, not a warning, a command. Holloway paused, just for a fraction of a second, the shift subtle but unmistakable. His grip did not release, but it faltered, the certainty behind it cracking at the edges. Diana straightened slightly, despite the cuffs, despite the restraint, her posture rising into something unmistakable, something that no longer fit the role he had forced on her. "Captain Diana Thorne," she said, each word deliberate, precise. "United States Army." The air changed, not gradually, instantly. The words landed with a weight Holloway could not deflect, not dismiss, not reinterpret. His eyes flicked to her face again, searching, recalculating, the first real fracture of doubt breaking through his expression. Diana continued, her gaze steady, locked onto his. "Decorated combat officer. Active command clearance. Federal jurisdiction authority in joint operations." Each title was delivered without emphasis, without pride, just fact. That made it worse. That made it undeniable. Holloway's grip loosened, not intentionally, but because something in his mind had shifted faster than his body could keep up. The narrative he had built, the assumptions he had leaned on, they collapsed all at once under the weight of what he was hearing. "You," he started, but the word fell apart before it could form into anything coherent. His jaw moved, but no sound followed. Behind them, Emily's phone remained raised, capturing everything, the silence, the shift, the moment power changed hands without a single physical movement. Diana tilted her head slightly, just enough to let the sunlight catch her face, her expression no longer neutral, but controlled in a different way, deliberate, undeniable. "You detained me without cause," she said, her voice steady, unwavering. "You used force where none was required. And you did it while being recorded." Each statement landed like a marker, a line drawn in place, evidence spoken aloud. Holloway's breathing changed, the rhythm uneven now, his chest rising and falling a little too quickly. His eyes darted briefly toward the phone, then back to Diana, then to the cuffs around her wrists as if seeing them for the first time. The authority he had worn so comfortably minutes ago now seemed to sit wrong on him, heavy, unstable. "I did not know," he muttered, the words thin, lacking the force they once carried. Diana did not soften. "You did not ask," she corrected quietly. That sentence settled deeper than anything else. It stripped away the last defense he had left. The problem was not a mistake. It was a choice. Holloway's hand finally released her arm completely, the contact breaking as if he had just realized he was holding something he should never have touched. He took a half step back, then another, the distance growing not out of control, but out of uncertainty, out of something dangerously close to fear. The road remained quiet, the sky unchanged, but everything else had shifted, completely, irreversibly. And for the first time since he stepped out of his car, Officer Derek Holloway was no longer the one in control. For a brief second, the silence lingered like a held breath, and then it shattered. The distant roar of engines rolled across the highway, low at first, then rising with unmistakable authority. Holloway's head snapped toward the sound, his posture stiffening as multiple vehicles approached fast, their presence deliberate, coordinated. Black SUVs and a marked patrol unit cut through the quiet stretch of road, tires gripping the asphalt with controlled urgency before coming to a sharp, precise stop behind his cruiser. Doors opened in unison. Boots hit the ground with purpose. Sergeant Mike Rourke stepped forward first, his expression carved from stone, eyes locked directly onto Holloway. There was no confusion in his gaze, no hesitation, only a cold, immediate understanding of what he was looking at. His attention shifted briefly to Diana, taking in the cuffs, the stance, the scene, then back to Holloway, and something in his jaw tightened. "Officer Holloway," Rourke said, his voice calm, but carrying a weight that pressed down harder than any shout. "Step away from her. Now." The command did not echo, it landed. Holloway's body reacted before his mind caught up, his hand dropping completely, his feet moving back as if pulled by instinct rather than decision. "Sergeant, he began, but the words stumbled, lost in the sudden collapse of his certainty. Rourke did not acknowledge the attempt. He moved past him, closing the distance to Diana with controlled urgency. Another officer stepped in beside him, already reaching for the cuffs with careful precision. "Captain Thorne," Rourke said, his tone shifting, firm but respectful. "Are you all right?" Diana gave a single nod, her composure unbroken, her posture unchanged despite everything that had just occurred. "I am," she replied evenly. The cuffs were removed quickly, the metal releasing with a sharp click that seemed louder now than before, as if marking a reversal rather than restraint. Diana lowered her arms slowly, rolling her shoulders once, not out of discomfort, but out of habit, resetting, reclaiming space that had been taken from her. Behind them, Holloway stood frozen, his hands hovering near his belt, his eyes darting between the officers, the vehicles, the woman he had just pinned to the hood minutes ago. The shift was absolute. He was no longer part of the control. He was the subject of it. Rourke turned back toward him, his expression now openly severe. "What exactly did you think you were doing?" he asked, his voice low, each word deliberate. Holloway swallowed, his throat tight, his earlier confidence nowhere to be found. She did not identify herself," he said, the excuse sounding weaker the moment it left his mouth. Rourke took a single step closer, his presence enough to silence any further attempt. "You did not ask," he corrected sharply, echoing Diana's earlier words with unmistakable emphasis. The weight of it landed harder this time. Another officer moved in behind. Holloway, his hands guided firmly but professionally behind his back. The shift in posture, in control, in authority, it was immediate and undeniable. "Officer Derek Holloway," the officer stated clearly, his voice carrying across the open road. "You are being detained pending investigation for excessive use of force and unlawful arrest." The words hung in the air, final, inescapable. Holloway did not resist. He did not argue. His shoulders lowered slightly, not in acceptance, but in the realization that there was nowhere left to stand. Emily's phone remained raised, capturing every second, the evidence now complete, undeniable. Diana stood a few feet away, calm, composed, watching not with satisfaction, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had seen outcomes like this before. Justice had not arrived loudly. It had arrived precisely, and it had placed everything exactly where it belonged. The weight of the moment began to settle, not with noise, not with chaos, but with a quiet return to order that felt almost surreal after the tension that had just unfolded. Holloway stood restrained now, his hands secured behind his back, his gaze lowered, no longer scanning, no longer asserting, just fixed somewhere on the gravel beneath his boots, as if the ground itself might offer an escape from the reality closing in around him. The officers beside him remained firm, professional, their movements controlled, their voices low and measured as they guided him toward the patrol vehicle that was no longer his to command. The same car that had once symbolized his authority now stood as a boundary, a reminder of how quickly that authority could be stripped away when misused. Sergeant Rourke watched the process with a steady expression, then turned his attention back to Diana. There was a subtle shift in his posture, a respect that did not need to be spoken loudly to be understood. "Captain Thorne," he said, his tone calm, grounded, "we will make sure this is handled properly." Diana met his gaze briefly and gave a small nod. There was no triumph in her expression, no visible satisfaction, only a quiet acknowledgement, as if this outcome had always been the inevitable result of choices made minutes earlier. Behind them, Emily slowly lowered her phone, her hands still, her face reflecting a mix of disbelief and clarity. She had witnessed the entire arc from assumption to abuse, from control to consequence. And now, the final shift into accountability. The road itself seemed unchanged, the same stretch of asphalt stretching into the distance, the same golden light settling across the horizon. Yet everything felt different. The imbalance had been corrected, not with force alone, but with truth brought into the open where it could not be ignored. Diana turned back toward her car, her steps measured, unhurried. She reached for the door, pausing for just a fraction of a second as her reflection caught in the glass. Composed, steady, exactly as she had been before any of this began. Then she opened it and slid back into the driver's seat, her movements smooth, controlled, untouched by lingering tension. The interior of the car welcomed her with familiar stillness, the quiet hum of the engine returning as she started it again. For a moment, she sat there, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, eyes forward, breathing even. Not recovering, not processing, simply resetting. Outside, the officers continued their work, their presence now structured, purposeful, the chaos fully replaced by procedure. Holloway was placed into the back of a unit, the door closing with a firm, final sound that carried across the open space like the closing of a chapter. Diana shifted the car into drive, her gaze steady as she eased back onto the highway. The tires rolled forward smoothly, the vehicle merging into the flow of the road, as if nothing had happened. Yet everything had. The sun dipped lower, casting a warm glow across the landscape, and the long stretch of road ahead opened once more, calm, uninterrupted. Inside the car, there was no tension, no urgency, only quiet. The kind of quiet earned, not given. Diana drove on, her posture unchanged, her presence steady, leaving behind a scene where power had been corrected, where truth had stood its ground, and where justice, without spectacle or excess, had simply taken its rightful place.